Thank you so much, Dr. Edgar. I take this opportunity, first of all, to thank whoever has taken time off the busy schedule to attend this seminar series, especially Professor Holly Hansen. I know that being a busy academician and a scholar, sparing time for about 2 hours is not something easy. I don't take it for granted. I really thank you for your time. And whoever is online and physically, thank you for coming. My name, I think, has been said, but to repeat, I'm Abudul Mahajubu, a former PhD fellow in the Department of History, Archaeology, and Heritage Studies. Right now, I'm working on one of my scholarly projects. It's about colonial tax policy and the reshaping of the Nubian identity in Uganda, unpacking the 1940 Luwalo tax riots in Buganda. Basically, I picked interest from my dissertation, which talks briefly about the 1940 Nubian riots. My thesis, PhD thesis, was mainly about the history of the Nubi, their identity, indigeneity, and then citizenship. So that's why I picked interest, because during my PhD, at least I never comprehensively looked at the 1940 riots, because that was not my main objective, though they contributed significantly to how the Nubian identity was looked at the time. So I thought that if I take time and write a comprehensive paper in form of a journal article, a monograph of kind of, will do a lot in trying to understand more about the identity of the Nubians, because it has been a matter of contestation for so long. So that's why actually I decided to write a concept on the 1940 riots, the Luwalo riots. And then luckily enough, the concept was well accepted as and it won the grant, such that I advance more and write about these riots and how they really influenced the identity of the Nubians. So that's how I landed, or I came to focus on the riots and the issue of the identity of the Nubians. My motivation stems from I think this is not working. Okay, just a minute. If not, okay. not what I want. Yeah, but there is a slide number. See. Okay, okay. So my motivation actually stems from the integration of the Nubia plan actually by the colonial authority that tried in 1930s to integrate the Nubi with other native societies. Of course, the integration plan was perceived differently amongst the Nubians and the native communities at the time. For instance, some Nubi perceived it as a plan that was aimed actually to take away their identity, their Nubiness. That's how they perceived it. Another section of the Nubians looked at it as a remedy of trying to solve the issue of the Nubian identity once and for all. Why? Because they felt like after most of them being cut off from the colonial service, they could not go back to where they came from, their home country, that is Sudan or Southern Sudan. So they felt like the act by the colonial authority or government to try to integrate them then will help them achieve their objective of being part of the native society, like other natives. However, there are others who actually believe that the plan or the policy of trying to integrate them was an act of betrayal amongst the colonial government. Why? Because they felt that after serving as King African Rifles, in the King African Rifles as colonial soldiers now, the colonial government was trying to kind of cut them off. So they resented that, and they felt like the best was maybe to contest the entire integration plan. Having said that, some natives, especially in Uganda, for them, they did believe that actually the integration was a welcome idea, policy. Why? Because they never believed that the Nubi were different from other native societies. So they felt like the Nubi were also natives. That's why they advocated that these Nubi also should be natives, and hence they should go ahead and even contribute to native obligations like paying of native taxes. In fact, in Buganda, some section of Buganda regarded the Nubia as Buganda themselves. So, they always referred to them as king's men or Basaja Baka, king's men. So the Nubi actually did not like that, because for them, they contained that they are not Baganda for any reason. And besides, they are a special African groups with more skills than other African societies. Skills in trade, skills in military. So they felt like calling them Baganda or forcing them be part of native society was like trying to take their identity away from them. So that actually forms part of my motivation that in 1940 we're seeing a section of the Nubians rioting against the payment of a tax, unpaid communal labor or Luwalo. So they resented that one. It was an act of betrayal by the colonial government to see them pay that kind of tax to the native government. But most importantly, where actually my interest stems, some of them contend that it was an act of trying to make them natives of other societies, yet they were not. That basically can be demonstrated, though the writing is of 1987, as you can see there, but it shows you how Uganda, even during the 1940s, tried to perceive some of the Nubi. You know, this is well shown in the guide, 1987, where one of the key senior citizens and at one time the minister of the portfolio, while addressing some Nubians who had returned from exile, assured them that the Nubians are true Buganda from Bombo. So, and when I tried to talk to also the sub-county chief of Metuba Esatu, Haji Musa Musoke, in his words also, he says that Nubi are king's men, true Buganda, who even pay their allegiance to the king at the king's palace in Mengo. So that actually never went well with a section. That kind of mind. I'm not saying that these people existed in 1940, but it never went well, even during the 1940s when the actually British or the colonial authority was trying as much as possible to integrate the Nubi with other ethnic communities or in Buganda, and then later on it exploded in 1940 riot. Before I also continue, I would like to shed more light a little bit on who are the Nubi. The Nubi are with ethnic community that coalesced into an indigenous ethnic group in Uganda, having coalesced into a group from a conglomeration of various ethnic communities in South Sudan and later on in Uganda. They are known for having these strict ethnic customs, which they guard so jealously, and that alone makes them a unique kind of ethnic community, because it is easier for a Nubi to assimilate another member from another ethnic society into becoming a Nubi, but it is very hard for another member to maybe assimilate a Nubi to his group. Why? Because of their rigid, I don't want to call it rigid, but conservative kind of tradition. So the Nubi finally established themselves as, or consolidated themselves as one of the indigenous ethnic communities in Uganda, at least according to the 1995 Ugandan Constitution. But even then, before that, they existed right from the 1890s. And throughout their identity and settlement has been an issue or contestation, where some qualify them as an indigenous ethnic community, others don't. They look at them as just a club or an association of various ethnic communities. But all in all, in my study, PhD study, at least I could say that that puzzle was solved when I concluded that this group actually forms a hybrid ethnic community that coalesced itself into an indigenous and recognized ethnic group in Uganda from a conglomeration of various ethnic communities. Why hybrid? It is very hard to find a Nubi who will tell you that I'm a Nubi without attaching himself or herself with a former ethnic group from where he came from. It doesn't mean that they practice or they follow exactly the tradition of the ethnic group from where they came from, but you'll find that just to keep a link and a history, they always attach themselves, their identity, to the former ethnic group from where they came from. That's why you'll find most of them calling themselves Nubi Kakwa, those who came from the Kakwa ethnic group, Nubi Lugbara, those who came from the Lugbara. We have the Nubiganda who call themselves the Nubiganda, those actually who came from the Baganda as a result of maybe assimilation or as a result of association. So that is how the Nubi came to settle and define themselves. All in all, they consider themselves as an independent ethnic community, you know, that has its own tradition, that professes its own religion, that is Islam, and also has its own cultural values and norms. So briefly, that's how they look at themselves. What is more important here to note is that this group also considered itself as one more skilled and more civilized than any other African group. Why? Because they attach their identity, you know, to militarism. You know, when you talk about Anubi, as it takes you back to the military history of their ancestors. So they considered themselves one as people who are more skilled than other Africans because of their military background. Secondly, they also consider themselves as an urban ethnic group, that they are not accustomed to living in rural areas. For them, they are always urban people. So that is how unique they looked at themselves. That alone, I think now also forms a gist of the discussion, where I'm trying to look at these riots, why a section of the Nubi had to riot for that case. Sorry. That will take me to briefly the 1940 riots that happened in Kampala. The riots, the way I look at them, these were not so much of serious riots because they never even attracted serious attention from the colonial government. However, they kind of portrayed something about the identity of the Nubi, especially the section that did not believe at one time that they were part of the native society. The Nubi in 1940 rioted against the payment of Luwalo, which was a commutative tax or commutation tax, which was supposed to be paid by every male native we could say any native person who was aged between the 18 years and 45. So that tax was in the form of performing labor. And it was a kind of a tax which you could say was characterized by coercion, because the people who were trying to enforce that kind of tax were the chiefs, the native chiefs. And in Buganda, it was so serious that they looked for whoever had to contribute to the Luwalo to forcefully do it, either by clearing roads, forests, or even digging up wells. So that is what really annoyed the Nubians, because first of all, they saw it as an act whereby they themselves, being that they consider themselves as a more civilized community of people, they were not obliged to perform that kind of work or that kind of unpaid tax or luwalo. But secondly, it also showed that the colonial government actually never appreciated the work of the Nubi as former colonial soldiers. So they looked at it as a mean through which the colonial government was trying to coerce them, even when they themselves or their ancestors had contributed highly in the pacification of the entire East Africa as soldiers of the King African Rifles. So a section of the Nubi refused to perform Luwalo, which led to their arrest, and then they were taken to police and then later on prosecuted. Other Nubians, on hearing about this incident, they stormed the police station and demanded for the immediate release of the Nubians, claiming that they were not supposed to perform Luwalo. They too, 44 in number, were also arrested and taken to Makerere Chibuga, or the offices of the sub-county chief. This is the current picture I took. The offices of the current chief of Makerere Chibuga, where they were tried and sent to Luzira prison, maximum prison, for failure to pay the Luwalo. Other Nubians, on hearing that their colleagues had been convicted and taken to prison, they marched to the district commissioner's office in Mengo and protested about the incident where their colleagues were taken to prison. These Nubians were led by their leader, Marjan Fadimula, who actually mobilized other Nubians around the suburb of Kampala to go and protest against the incident. What happened was that the colonial police was ordered to arrest them and imprison them. On hearing about the arrest of those who had gone to actually try to protest the move by the colonial authorities of arresting their colleagues. The women, the Nubian women, also joined in and went to protest. They showed their protest by, they showed their protest by stripping naked, you know, half naked, not fully naked, you know. So the incident was a shock to the district commissioner, who came out hearing these women shouting on top of their voices to inquire what actually happened. They presented their grievances to him, and he said, no problem. I will solve that by making you join your husbands in prison. So he also sent the women to prison, the Nubian women to prison. Why am I flashing that actually picture? Is that it is very hard to find the literature that presents the nature or presents Nubian women anywhere, during the historical times, beginning from the time when they came in the 1890s. The only picture I managed to get was that taken by Guerra, which showcased women trying to sell flour in Entebbe in the 1940s and 50s. That picture can tell you that, can communicate a message I want to relay here, that always women were part of the historical, could say, historical moment, which involved the Nubian men. So they were part and parcel of the history. When you talk of the history of the Nubi, it will always include the women, though the women in most cases are not talked about. And also that motivated me to try and understand what actually was the role of the Nubian women in the anti-colonial struggles. For instance, when they came out to protest the incident of the arrest of the Nubian men. So that also contributed something important to this study, or it will contribute maybe something important to this study to try and understand their role actually. From that incident, I tried to locate some information here and there about the Luwalo itself, the unpaid labor tax, and also to try and understand why some Nubi, by the way, not all Nubi contested the payment of this tax, others accepted it and went ahead to pay. Why am I saying went ahead to pay? Those who could not perform it, they were obliged to pay 10 shillings, equivalent to what they would offer as unpaid labor. Those who couldn't, then they were forced to go and work. Others accepted, and that's where now my work gets a little bit interesting, why others had to accept it while others refused. What so far I have gathered, I came to understand that those who are accepted were mainly those high-ranking Nubian officers who had served in the army, in the colonial army, and were promised positions as native officers if they try to convince and enforce this Luwalo tax onto their fellow Nubians. So those accepted in one way or the other to go ahead and pay Luwalo, and even make others pay. Then there are those who totally refused and said, no, we are not paying. Why? Those are the ones who considered that, first of all, the colonial government was trying or was making a policy that was targeted to take away their identity as a semi-civilized or civilized group from other Africans. Secondly, they also argued that there was a move, it was a move intended to make the Nubians, pay their allegiance to the king of Buganda, and for them, they do not have a king of their own. So that's why they were not willing to pay native tax to the native authority or the Buganda authority at that time. But most importantly, also, there was a group that looked at it as a betrayal by the British of not rewarding them, for the work they performed as members of the King's African Rifle. So far, that is all about the riots I can talk about. It is a work in progress, being that it is a postdoctoral research. I'm trying to gather information from archives and then trying to talk to elders about this kind of riot. It never received the problem or the challenge I'm getting. It never received quite, you could say, wide coverage as far as the media was concerned. And I was so shocked that even some of the elders I've tried to talk to do not know about this incident. So they don't know whether really, when I introduce myself to them and tell them about this incident, some of them don't even know about the incident itself, but some know about it, not particularly the Nubians, but also other members from other societies. So I just wanted to get some insight about, more insight about this incident, and maybe it can reshape further the study. It is actually at the draft level. I'm trying to get a draft out of it to try and understand more about this riot. It is an interesting historical moment which happened, and I felt like it can make a very wonderful contribution about how these policies tried so much to reshape African identity when you take it to the level of, or when you bring it to the Nubians. What is also interesting, which I also observe, is that when some of the Nubians were arrested, they kind of felt like the arrest itself was illegal. And I was so shocked to ask why they felt that it was illegal. And then one elder, who is taken to be a historian in court, Nubian elder, told me that by 1939, this coercive labor known as Luwalo had been actually abolished. So but it continued in the 1940s. That's why some of them had to resent it in one way or the other. I don't know whether he was speaking the mind of the Nubia at that time. I'm yet to analyze that with some of the literature, but what I know that indeed by 1939, I think this labor, coercive kind of unpaid labor had been abolished, and he was spot on that. So that is, I don't want to talk much about this work right now, but what I'm interested in mainly is to get more feedback and how better this work can go. It is at its infant stage, but I know that when completed, it will communicate something very important when it comes to the Nubian identity and understanding the Nubian father. I thank you for now. All suggestions and comments are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahajubu, for the presentation. And what we'll do is we'll just go directly to our discussant, Professor Hansen. Your 5 to 10 minutes, really as long as you wish to ask questions and raise comments, and then we'll open the floor to the audience. So you're welcome to unmute and
wonderful.
That's great.
Okay, can people hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, lovely. I want to thank Dr. Mahajubu for this really very interesting paper. I agree with him absolutely that this is a fascinating incident. And if we look at it carefully and unfold it, it says a lot about the dilemmas of Uganda as a colony and as a future state in the 1940s, and also about the challenges that British strategy as a colonial power had created in Uganda by that time, almost 60 years in. Also, the Luwalo protest of the 1940s absolutely gives us a window into the role of women. So I completely agree. You're onto something really interesting. It's a fascinating story. What I want to do in my 5 minutes, or maybe 10, is suggest some ways that the story could be framed, or some things that you want to do to think about framing it, because a really interesting moment deserves a really careful frame. So I want to suggest some things about framing, and I may have more questions by the end, but my 2 questions I want to start with is, do you want to call it a riot? In the Uganda Herald, it's called a riot, but perhaps it's not a riot. Perhaps it's a very disciplined protest that has moments of extreme emotion, but maybe it intentionally had those moments of extreme emotion, and maybe riot isn't the right word. That's one question. Then the other question is, how many actors do we need to be looking at the same time? So the British are putting pressure, they're punishing people for not paying a Buganda kingdom tax. So what's the role of the Buganda kingdom? Can we see if it's like there's Buganda, certainly royal Buganda. Are there other Buganda? As you said, there are Nubians who want to pay the tax, who see something in it for them to be seen as obedient colonial citizens and others who really don't. And then there's colonial authorities. And maybe if we look at it really carefully, we see a difference in a perspective in that group. But if you take, and then there's the Nubian men and the Nubian women. So if you take all of those groups and see all of them acting, does it change what we see? Okay, so now I want to talk about framing, and I want to talk about framing in 3 ways. First is, what is the time frame? Can we use a 1980s statement about this community to understand what it was like in the 1940s? I don't think we can. I think that, or if we can, I need to see more of an argument about why that's so. And you have argued, and I'm sure this is part of your dissertation, and I really want to read it, that the Nubians choose to be, they're a diverse group of people who choose to become an ethnic group over time through elements, cohering elements that they exercise, religion and maybe their occupational choice of being in the military. But is that a constant over time? And even if people are Muslim in the 1880s and they're Muslim in the 1940s and they're Muslims in the 1980s and the 2020s, are those elements of Banubi identity, are they working in the same ways over all those periods? And I don't think they can be, because there are moments in that time, for example, what there are moments when there aren't what's his name? Just before the Sudanese mutiny, people say we can't find any Sudanese to be soldiers. So there's an early moment when that you know, those elements of that identity, maybe they're not what making they're not what make the community cohere. So I think that we can't assume that the glue is the same glue over this long period of time. So what is it in the 1940s, and what elements, what actions of the group themselves, or the Buganda in relation to them, or the British in relation to the Buganda in relation to them, create these 1940s conditions? I think there's a lot of transformation in the Nubian story before 1940, and that which I'm sure you know, because I'm sure it's in your dissertation, but bringing it out in relation to 1940 will make your 1940 story more interesting. The second frame that I want to talk about is sources of evidence. And one of the things I really, really like about this paper is the evidence that you have found from doing interviews with older people who remember. I think that's really valuable, but there's more interesting evidence. And one of the things you want to do, which possibly you can do by going, or it's also possible to find it by other people having used it, is you want to use the migrated archives, because the migrated archives say really super interesting things about this moment. And let me just tell you a few things that are there. So one of the things that you can see in the secret police records, and then the reports that are made of this incident that show up. So the migrated archives, in case people don't know, are the sometimes they're called the Stanslope papers. They're colonial archives that were secretly gathered and then kept hidden in England because the British thought that it would make them look bad. But they're now available in the archives, the British National Archives. And about this incident, part of what you can see is that there's a very long lead up to this protest, with a lot of meetings, a lot of negotiation, a lot of people spend a lot of time talking. And in the reports of that, you can see very clear discipline inside of the Banubi community. People going to their leaders, hearing what their leaders say, agreeing that they will do what their leaders tell them to do, which is part of the reason why I wonder whether we want to call it a riot. The district commissioner describes the women's action as, quote, screaming hysteria. They were clearly undone by the presence of the women who were just making noise, and probably the undressing is a form of cursing. You know, a very well delivered, powerful curse made by women. Another thing that you find in the archives is that once all of these people are in prison, they continue to mobilize their sense of their being a group by saying they can't eat the food that they're given. Like they won't eat whatever it is that the prison provides. It might be matoke. I'm not sure. I just know that they didn't eat what they were provided. They insisted on different food because the food they were given wasn't the food that Banubi ate. And they went on a hunger strike until they got the food that they wanted. So what you can see in the records in the migrated archives, which are in the British National Archive, really support the argument that you're making in ways in that the group is very organized. Part of their explanation of why they're doing what they are is their groupness, is their coherence. And I just encourage you to look for those sources. And that brings me to my third suggestion about framing, which is I think you want to explore more explanatory frameworks than just Mamdani, because I'm not sure that what Mamdani is arguing about natives, non-natives, race, tribe, I'm not sure it's complex enough for the situation that you're looking at. It's a very interesting argument, and in a way it applies because the Banubi community are saying we're not natives. But they're doing more than that. And there's a kind of simplicity to that, there's a kind of political science-y categorical, they thought like this, they thought like this, in what Mamdani is doing that I'm not sure it's serving you. So it might be useful to say, here's an argument that Mahmoud Mamdani makes, and here's an argument that somebody else makes, and here's an argument that somebody else makes. And from this person's argument, here's what we might expect to see in the 1940s. And from this person's argument, here's what we might expect to see. But here's what I see, and this is why I see it. And this person is useful to me in this way, and this person is useful to me in this way. So I just suggest exploring that, because I've felt reading the paper that the kind of simplicity of Mamdani's native, non-native, tribe, race. I think there's more going on in your paper, and there's more going on in the history than what that shows. Okay, I think my time is up. It's more than up. Thank you so much for doing this work, and I think it's going to be awesome.
Thank you very, very much. And I don't know, Dr. Mahajubu, if you want to respond to a few of those comments, and then we'll open up the floor to questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor. I'm really thankful for your wonderful contribution, the time you took to read the paper. The paper is still in draft. Actually, immediately after gathering some of the few evidences that I managed to get, I had to come up with something very tangible in form of a draft because of this seminar. I'm yet to reflect on this paper. For instance, when you talk about the, is it right to call it a riot? That's what is being reported in some of the evidences I was working with. But then I also need to reflect more on the term itself, riot, because even then the colonial authorities referred to it as most cases as a disturbance, a minor disturbance. But more to that, as you said, I really agree with you because it showed in one way that even before it happened, there were a series of negotiations going on between the colonial officials and the Nubi. And the Nubians also had their representatives who were negotiating on their own behalf. So it was like there is somewhere where they did not agree, which again I need to explore, and maybe that called in for later on the riot, or that erupted into a riot by a section of the Nubi. What I know that even before the 1940s, when the riot really happened, the Nubians already had resented, had refused to, some of them, to pay this kind of tax. For instance, according to archival evidence, there is a communication where I think the district commissioner of Eastern Province complained that members of the Nubi community, that is by 1928, had refused to perform Luwalo. So he was trying to report to the provincial governor for advice. And then the provincial governor said that he should come up with ways to see that the Nubians, by all means, pay these native obligations. So you find that there was already inside protest amongst the Nubi, not to contribute. Then the agency, the issue of agency, yeah, that also needs a lot to interrogate on the side of the colonial government, Buganda kingdom. But one thing I have realized in this study, that the Buganda themselves were very happy for the Nubi to be part of a group that was supposed to contribute to Luwalo and be also perceived as native. Why? Because they felt like the Nubi were kind of classified as a more privileged African group than others. So for them, they were very actually interested in seeing that the Nubi, just like any other native, contribute to the Luwalo and also other native obligations. So yes, the Buganda kingdom pushed so much the agenda of making sure that these people are part of the natives society in Buganda, and they also contribute to Luwalo. The colonialists, or the colonial authority, of course, Luwalo was one of the form of taxation which helped them a lot as far as infrastructure development was concerned, and also when it was committed to money, then it also a source of revenue. So they were also pushing the agenda, but also that needs to be interrogated further, which I'm working on. Framing is very interesting. I think when I write, I try to conclude this draft, because even what we shared was not a conclusive draft, but because of the seminar, I wanted to come up with something at least. I will have to reorganize, and I really, really appreciate the work you've done of trying to bring out the way it should read better. I didn't know, because actually I had written a paper, an independent paper. It is in Mawazo, yeah, Mawazo, about the shifting Nubi identity. So I do agree that actually the ethnic identity of the Nubi was not at constant from the time they actually could say entered into Uganda in the 1890s as British colonial soldiers. It went on changing, and what was perhaps what they considered features of ethnicity in the 1890s, then they were not the same when they protested, for instance, in the mutiny, and in the 1920s, and then in the 1940s. So they kept on changing. So in one way or the other, I'm yet also to bring that debate into this and see how it can come out well. Evidence, I appreciate going in for more migrated archives. I think they're very, very interesting. And also, I think when it comes to the role of women, that also was is very interesting also to try and explore more using these other migrated archives. So I think a lot still has to be done, but all I can say that these are very, very wonderful suggestions, and that was mainly the purpose of this seminar. I really wanted to understand how other scholars, other academicians, other actors feel about the entire work, and giving suggestions to see how it can come out well. I thank you, Professor, and whoever is going to contribute next. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the floor is now open for questions, both online and in the room. If you're online, you could just, you can type it directly into the chat, or just use the raise hand button, and I'll collect some hands. I could begin while people are formulating their questions by asking a couple of speculative questions. So but two things that come to mind directly are, why 1940 and not 1939 or 1930 or any other year, and why women take a central role, which I think Professor Hansen's comments went to. And so I have these are questions I don't know the answer to, but first, when exactly is the change in the Luwalo law being applied? So is it that there's an attempt in 1940 to impose Luwalo, and immediately there's a protest, but you're saying that there have been protests against Luwalo before, And sort of going through the files, my understanding is that there were changes going back earlier in the 1930s, before 1940. So my speculation is, what else is happening to the Nubi community? Is it that are Nubians being recruited into service for the World War II by this time in 1940? What is it that's happening? Is there another element here that's making this protest rise to the for the discipline of the protest that Professor Hansen described to take shape in 1940 and not earlier or later? The other thing that strikes me just on this point is that it's not a protest against just any tax. It's a protest, and I think this was like a really great point you made in the presentation, that it's a protest against a specific kind of labor, like demeaning what was perceived as lower status labor, like to do common labor alongside any other person, not the kind of more prestigious service of military service, which is something that Michel Moyd and other scholars emphasize about military communities under colonialism. Then my second part is about, well, why do women take such an important role? And again, speculative, but is there a change in women's economic autonomy around this time? So I think in Buganda, women are increasingly moving into, taking control of or having a more prominent role in the marketing of matoke in urban centers in the 1950s. But I'm not sure what is, like, seeing that photograph of women selling flour, was it in Entebbe? I'm wondering, looking at maybe the work of Christine Obo, who's written about this, or history, economic, a gendered economic history. Are women just doing this because they fear that they're going to lose household labor from men? Are they fearing that men are no longer, their husbands won't have the same prestige that they had before? Or are they concerned that their own economic autonomy is going to be impacted because men are being taken for Luwalo? Those are it's speculation, but those are things that, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on those or answers.
Thank you, Dr. Edgar, for the questions. I'll begin with the last about women. According to the Nubian actually setup, you'll find that women present a certain cultural power, cultural, moral power, in the society. And it is believed that if a Nubian woman, curses you, then you will not, it will not be easier for you the whole of your life. So they are the source of blessing. And their curses are actually in this riot are well demonstrated, as a Nubian man or any, what one should avoid is to see the upper, nakedness of a woman who is an elder. So they are using, you could see here that now they are using that as a tool to make sure that the women they are men. Well, they can be men, but who knows? Maybe they were their sons, their husbands, So let us take what we have, our weapon, to the DC's office and also portray that actually, this is how serious it is, and we want these people out. So they thought perhaps maybe that would work. But again, yes.
Or getting at sort of like the rationale or are they doing it as beyond like a sense of, are they, like you've mentioned that there's an ideological kind of sense of this tax is degrading. But I'm just wondering if this is a window into a gendered economic dynamic. In other words, why women, but why women in 1940? So rather than saying that in general women have a status, like is there something about this moment that sort of enables leaders to bring all, women into this protest movement in a very disciplined way at that time that maybe in 1935 it doesn't. I don't know.
Yeah. I understand your point, and that's why I said earlier that I need to interrogate more this aspect. But even then, you would find that the men who actually were part of the British colonial soldiers, even before the 1940s, they used to support their women. What they could earn as their wages, as salaries, again could be given to their women to begin this small trade. So they were integral, like men and women. So for instance, the economic benefit, of the entire process of soldiering as King African Rifle servicemen, went even more to women, because they could, these soldiers could give the money, because for them always they were on the move to their women. And then these women could venture into petty trade. So in one way or the other, you'll find that it was like, now, first of all, why 1940, just to connect with this, you find that the colonial government was in an exercise of trying to retire most of the Nubian servicemen, Yes, in the 1930s, most of them actually were being retired. So there was that issue now, where are they going to be earning from? Secondly, those who try to protest, then you arrest them and then put them to jail. So also that, in one way or the other, cut off the economic benefit which was going to the women. So the women also feel agitated to go and protest to see that their men at least are released. So, but still, I'll have to look into more of that. Then why 1940? Yeah, I think 1940 came as a result of now all these negotiations have failed, and what next? It's like there is a situation of confusion, or a situation where now the Nubi cannot predict their future. Most of them have been retired from the army. They cannot go back to their former homeland. So what next? And here the solution is that let us try to integrate them with the native communities, let them go into agriculture, let them begin cultivating, and then on top of that, contribute even to the welfare of the native government. To the Nubi, they felt that was not the way to go. But that, again, within the negotiation, you bring this understanding that their leaders felt, okay, maybe for us, we are okay, since we have been promised to be native officers or chiefs. So for us, we can survive. But what about the rest of the Nubi? So these people decided, no, why don't we, protest paying these taxes and even be part of the native community as they want us to be. And that's how I found that the 1940 now, since that was done in 1940, carries more meaning to the study I was working on. Perhaps that also would change. Who knows? With the evidence which comes in. You wanted to add something? Yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, going to your earlier point is a question in the chat by Carol Summers. I don't know if Carol, if you want to expand on this question about King's African Rifles recruitment. I think you've partially sort of, added something already, that recruitment was declining in the 1930s. I don't know. Yeah, Carol, go ahead.
I have a very bad connection, so my apologies. This is really interesting. My main wonder about this is thinking about frames. My understanding from the British archives was that while the early populations of Nubi may have been aging by 1940, in 1939 and 1940, there was a massive effort to expand the KAR and to recruit new people into it. And I'm kind of wondering if that affected Nubi identity and may have led to a conservative reaction to preserve Nubi special status. And I'm also thinking now that what you describe in terms of the reluctance to do farming is exactly the pattern that we get from everybody who did military service in about 1945 or 46. You have all these people that say we do not want to go back to northern Uganda, not just Buganda, but actually much further beyond. So, and there are great files in the Mountains of the Moon archive about the demobilization campaign. So I'm kind of wondering how ethnicization fits into this and how adding in some of these additional sources that Holly's talking about might actually help.
I'm sorry to speak again. I feel it's not my share, but I think that what we're talking about shows why this is so interesting for the history of all Uganda, because it's kind of this little moment where when the British are saying, oh, you guys should be Buganda and pay tax, you live there 60 years, you should belong there. What they're kind of saying is, oops, we made a mistake. Our plan for how we envisioned the colony, we've changed our minds. We don't want you to be who we wanted you to be 40 years ago. And there are Banubi who are saying, who I think part of not paying Luwalo, this is why I asked about time and when a source comes from. Because if somebody says in 2020, it was because we were more civilized, is that what people were saying in the 1940s? Because I wonder if at the time, the problem with Luwalo is not that it's degrading labor, because actually people were paying it as money. I wonder if part of it is the symbolism. The labor is a gift that you give to the king because you want to be connected to the king. It's like it's a statement of I belong. So people don't want to do it because they don't want to belong.
Sorry, we just lost the last maybe 15, 20 seconds of your comments. Sorry, we had a internet interruption.
I was just saying it's a small thing that it's a small moment in time which shows the playing out of really big processes. I'm done.
So maybe if I can also add on to this thread by saying, I wonder also if this is something to do with generational tensions among within the Nubian community in 1940. So you mentioned the older generation was more likely to support, or go along with the tax, but also you're saying that fewer and fewer younger Nubians are enlisting in the King's African Rifles in the 1930s than they were before. And this is a point that I know others have made. I'm just looking here that well, this is a Nairobi district commissioner sort of saying that the old Nubi is a man to whom the colony owes much, but the second generation and this new hybrid generation are degenerate and generally a disgrace to their fathers. So it's something both about, which tells us something both about the prejudice and racism of the district commissioner, but it also tells us that something about what the younger generation is pursuing and how they're not performing the same ideals that their parents' generation might have done in the 1930s leading up to 1940. So I wonder if this is also a story about generational tension over what it means to be Nubian, and also what to be, quote, civilized or superior, what that even means. And I wonder if there's a story to tell about, rather than being something that all Banubi share, but whether this is a field of debate and contestation that might come out a bit from the few files that are here at the National Archives, probably maybe even more. I don't know about the files at MMU. And then hopefully if you can get access to the FCO files as well. I don't know if you want to respond to all of this conversation, and then there are a few more questions.
All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, to begin with, generational, whether this was generational, of course, there was also the element of that generational contestation, which I also show in my thesis, whereby if you look at actually the group of the Nubi who accepted to maybe pay Luwalo, these are most of the Nubi who had been retired, after the 1897 incident of the Nubian mutiny. And then you have now the generation, and this is what I hinted on earlier in my presentation, that perhaps these are the Nubi who attempted to go back to their home country, Sudan, but they could not fit there. Now, when they came back, remember that they had once visited their former homeland in the disguise of attending an Islamic festival, but then they found that the environment was not conducive for them to stay anymore, so they had to return back. So they were they were realizing that perhaps we should settle where we once left. So these are the people you would say that they were kind of willing to take up the native identity and even be settled or be integrated with others. But then there were these young generation, or at that time, who believed that still for them there were more a civilized community, and their role is mainly soldiering. Maybe that's what Professor Sanders is talking about, that they were looking at being perhaps more recruited in the King's African Rifles for Second World War, and than being integrated and also perform Luwalo. So in one way or the other, it gives you a sense of why that certain section of the Nubi, perhaps that is the generation that actually
Our internet connection is, but I hope those online can hear us.
I can hear you again.
Great, great, sorry. I think we can have another round of questions. I think first we'll take maybe two at a time. And first, I had seen a question from Jackie Namukasa online. I don't know if Jacqueline, if you're able to ask the question, to unmute and ask your question.
No, doctor, just read it as it is.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. Actually, because we lost our connection, I've lost your question. I remember it had something to do with how the British responded economically. I don't know. Could you help me to formulate it, because I don't have it in front of me, unfortunately.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Mahajubu, for the good presentation. I just wanted to know whether this riot had any impact on the British economic policies, and more so the place of women in the Nubian community and Uganda as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you for helping us with that. And Dr. Tunanuche, yes, please go ahead. You'll have to get a microphone here.
We are not hearing.
A good example. A very good example is Muhumuza. Have you heard Muhumuza?
Yes, we are now getting you.
A very good example is Muhumuza, who was a renowned female strugglist against colonial the colonial rule in Chigezi. So can we then say that these Nubian women can be located in the whole Ugandan anti-colonial struggles, or they were actually trying to struggle against the imprisonment of their husbands or their men? Then the second is about the Luwalo issue. I understand indeed the Luwalo labor had been outlawed, though it was maintained as Burunji Bwansi, practiced for this for the kingdoms or the native authorities. The failure then for the Nubians to participate, do you think it is some kind of cultural arrogancy or a way of asserting their identity in Uganda? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tunanuki. Actually, they are captivating questions. I will start with the last, Yes, it was outlawed, I agree, but then it was still enforced, however much the International Labour Convention, mainly on forced labor, had outlawed it in the 1930s. But then the British colonial government in Africa started to implement that decision. But because it contributed a lot, to the colonial government, this in forms of support, it continued, and we are seeing that even in 1940, it was still continuing. You could say that it was continuing, but at the same time, they were contemplating on how to turn it into a kind of native administration tax. That's how it was kind of substituted into the 10 shillings. So failure to contribute, of course, you're supposed to severely pay. And I think this is how these people rioted against it. The other issue, of women positioning themselves because of what was happening in Uganda at the time, the positioning of women, the gender agency. I don't feel that that's what the Nubian women had in mind at that particular moment. What they had at that particular moment was the incident of arresting their husband, and their husbands were kind of a source, the breadwinners. So that is why they came out to protest the move, thinking that if they use their tool of undressing, maybe it will help. So it was not more of positioning themselves into the national grid at that time as women. So that is how I can convey it then to my sister, Dr. Jacqueline. Still the issue of the economic impact of this Luwalo, something like that. Yeah, it really helped a lot the colonial government to run its business through its administration, especially the native administration of these units, the native administration units. So that's why they were silent about it, but they could support it. Why? Because when it was even computed into money, that if you could not perform Luwalo, then you contribute some money. That money contributed a lot to the coffers, the colonial coffers. I think you can read the work of is it Vergil something, who writes about it very well. So in one way or the other, Luwalo, as Luwalo, unpaid labor, you know, when you convert it into money, then the 10 shilling created a very big difference economically through the support of the colonial project and the colonial agenda. And that's why the colonial authorities were hesitant actually to see it go and instead substitute it with a native tax. The other issue still on women, the agents of women, what motivated me in this study mainly is to look at the way the history of the Nubia has been told right from the colonial time. You really grapple with positioning women, you know, and yet they contributed significantly to the entire history. One, they composed songs for their husbands when they were morale songs, when they're going to for war in case, or they were deployed. That was that were actually women. Secondly, they did a lot in trying to patch if the torn clothing of the uniforms of their husband. That was the role of women. Then two, they were the custodians of homes when their women went out there to fight. But all this is not located anywhere. We are seeing them even participating in something what you will call a political move, you know, of going there to protest before the government. So I felt that maybe this incident, because it is the only actually incident which is recorded seeing Nubian women coming out. So I felt like maybe it is the time to appreciate now the agency of Nubian women in the entire Nubian history. So that is what kind of captivated me to look at the issue of women in this incident here.
Dr. Mahajubu, that's why I'm asking as to whether this incident really changed the place of women in the community and Uganda as a whole. Thank you.
Yeah, of course it changed. It changed. Why? Because first of all, in one way or the other, it kind of showed that Nubian women can engage, can go an extra mile of trying to participate in what you would rather call dangerous or sensitive kind of incidents like the ones of protest. So the way they started viewing, and by the way, maybe from that moment, maybe in one way or the other, I'm yet to learn, you know, and to study this community further. You'll find that the position of women within the Nubian community to date, you know, is very, very kind of important when it comes to decision making, you know. So women will always sit with men in case of any decision to be made. Maybe, but I would not speculate on that because I haven't gotten any evidence, but maybe perhaps it will come. But I know in my own understanding that yes, it changed. It changed the role of women, the way women were perceived, you know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mahajubu. It's very exciting listening to you. And I really want to, I think I want to begin where you just ended, because it seems to me then that this is one moment when the women come out of the domestic domain and come out to the public, and I wonder whether you'd be able to say a little bit more about the position of women before then? What were they doing? What were they expected to do? And so is this a moment that women defy, maybe culturally, what is being seen as the place of women, and where there's, they're not where they're supposed or not supposed to be. And then I also would like to know, and I might have missed this, I think you said it, the impact of the stripping. What does the stripping, what does the stripping exactly cause the authorities to do, if it does? And again, I'm asking this because if you look at a number of the women protests in the colonial moment in different parts of Africa, you get those cases where the stripping is the sort of like tool that they use. So they may not have stripped completely, but still that partial stripping, as you call it, is it something that we can also understand within the culture or the history of the Nubi? Is this something that women could do? Because most times where we've seen those cases of women stripping, it's when they're like extremely angry, and this is like the only tool they have, right? They can't get the guns to fight the men, or they fight the men or fight the police, and what they do is like, this is what I have, and they're stripping. So I think that a little bit of description of that, if you can have access to that, and just looking at other cases where women have marched or in the process stripped as they protested against different conditions in the colonial moment. And then I was also wondering about the economic conditions at that moment. 1940s. So 1940 with World War II, with World War II on, and the impact of that on almost some households within Uganda. Is this something that perhaps complicates their economic situation even further? So that the times are already hard, and then the bread earners are being taken away, and then the women get so desperate, and they have to fight for that. So I think that if you're able to tell us a little bit more about the economic situation, and then the idea of the women. So the picture that you shared there, Edgar commented about that, the women selling flour. Is this something that was common? Were they selling flour before? Is this the first time they are doing this because of the prevailing circumstances? And I think that that really helps. I really liked the comment that Holly, if you're still on, hi, and thank you so much for joining. Yes, so the idea that for people who are for some of the people, because you have the people who are saying that the Nubians are Buganda, and then you have the people who are saying no to paying this kind of tax, because to pay this kind of tax is to sort of say that we accept or we recognize the authorities. And I thought that when you talked about the Nubians who had gone back to attend the Muslim festivals, and then they found that perhaps the conditions back in their homeland were not as pleasant, and they decided to come back. So maybe they realize, okay, there's no point trying to go back. I think we have to, we sort of have to, I think they become sort of like moderate, and it's give and take. I think we can accept the circumstances here. So I wonder whether your sources can actually allow you to push a little bit further and know exactly which, if you can be able to tell which kind of people are saying yes to this, which kind of people are saying no, which kind of people are ready to become Buganda. And at that moment, when they say what exactly they mean, then it sort of brings together, different things in a rich way. And I think it's a very fascinating paper.
Thank you, Dr. Pamela. These are all actually reflective questions. I would say that the position, you talked of the position, before, actually, I didn't think about that when I was reading this paper. I was actually focusing mainly on this group that protested, at the DC's office. But out of this interaction now, I started to realize that the agency of the Nubian women was even beyond that. And the mindset which I had when I was walking in this room and when I was writing this draft was mainly focusing on 1940 riots. But now I realize that perhaps, there is, as a historian, by the way, I need to go back and at least begin, and look at those historical moments up to the 1940s. I think they tell a lot. Might have been, this is what I'm realizing out of this deliberation, especially from Professor Holly, that maybe it is the climax of something which was happening before. And I think now when I relate to even the Nubians in Eastern Uganda in 1928, when they had already started protesting this Luwalo, of course, maybe there was something brewing, and then 1940 became a climax. But as a mentor, I think you are spot on. I cannot comment on this, but just to perfect, to see the manuscript read better, because you're spot on. This incident actually, let me say something about it, stripping of women. Yes, it is done, but to the Nubi, the way they attach more value on it, it's like you are almost dead, but still moving, when someone, and what I understand after you've posed that question is that perhaps they went and then they received. That's what I want now to bring out, to explore, but I don't know how, whether the sources would allow. But I feel like by the time perhaps they stripped, they had signaled, someone signaled, or they had the signals that perhaps even if you strip, even if you do what, well, they are not going to release them. So as a result, what do? Okay, let us also cast them by stripping. So it comes as a result of desperation, as a result, of running out of option. But since we have our tool also, let us also do what? Use it. So that is the understanding I'm picking. But still, I will sit and reflect on it more further and see how it goes. Thank you.
So I think I realize we're a bit over 4 o'clock, but we do have another hand from Mukasa Joseph. If you'd like to unmute, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you for the presenter and Professor Holly Hanson for the discussion. I have a few things to put forward. One is that, yes, we have mentioned the word women, but we need to be more, we need to dig more to know which kind of women are we talking about here. Are these women only the wives of the people who were arrested? Also, there is another group of women who joined them, because there is a tendency of people using the word women, and they don't really tell us exactly who are these women. So we need to be specifically clear of who are these women who joined. At least you should try to dig out in that literature. Secondly, how many are Nubians are we looking at this time? How many in terms of numbers? Because the number may be a very small number, and then maybe the colonial government was seeing them as a minority group, so they will not be much, there was nothing much to look at. So the numbers also matter. How many were they? Can they cause a mass movement? Can they cause a resistance? Because you are seeing that the first men were arrested, others joined. Then after women joined, but how many are these? Then can we have really a problem that the number is a problem? So that once we know that the number is this, and this is the capacity, their level of participation, when people don't actually had some kind of force. And lastly, we also have to compare with Uganda's time, because there's something we call Kasanvu labor. I don't know if you have heard of that what called Kasanvu labor. That the Buganda men actually, in the book of Hall Hanson, her book, she mentioned these people of Kasanvu labor. The men actually ran away when they saw labor, they were forced to pay tax. Men ran away and women remained. So the question would be, was this the same time when we had Kasanvu labor in Uganda when men were running away, or it was a different time? So you have to compare these two periods, to compare this kind of time, and whether you see whether the Buganda men who ran away because they were coerced to pay this tax was the same as the Luwalo labor, which was being asked to be paid by the Nubians. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we have a couple of hands. Yeah, so maybe we could just take Moses and Alex, and you'll just need to speak into the microphone. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abudul, for the wonderful presentation you have really brought about. I have a few suggestions or questions or clarifications to make. One, like Joseph has said and Dr. Pamela, I put a question here that what next after this gentleman, Muller, is it Muller? After Muller leading more Nubians to go to the district headquarters in Mengo, and maybe the female or women from the Nubian community joining the riots, and should I call them the British governor by then, or district administrator orders that you are here, take them to the cells also. What next? Did these women help in releasing their husbands, or maybe the male counterparts that were jailed, or nothing really happened? Because I haven't seen or haven't heard you say something that maybe after a month or two or a year, men and women who were jailed were later released. Number two, you talked about the hybrid Nubians. And again, at one point you said these Nubians visited their homeland for a conference, a Muslim conference, kind of, should I call it conference? Then, in my capturing, you said you had these Nubians who are classified. Some are Lugbal Nubians, some are Kakwa Nubians, some are Ganda Nubians. So I see some kind of, should I call them ethnic, a multiple ethnic group coming to be called Nubians as a whole. Now, did this contribute to the Nubians who said, yes, let's pay the 10 shillings, because maybe they were marginalized in the Nubian community? You know, it can be kind of safe haven for you. Since I'm a minor, let me pay and continue maybe in the Ganda or in the Buganda community. And these ones maybe who say, we're not going to pay, maybe the Nubian superiors, in terms of maybe clarifying them that for us, we're not going to pay, we feel we are the original ones. You get? That's what I feel like. And the last one, when it comes to civilization, like you said, they assert that they were regarded as a special group of people in Buganda or during the colonial days. Could this have contributed? Maybe somehow it contributed to their saying no to Luwalo, the forced labor. But again, I'm seeing it in terms of culture, like you mentioned, and religion. They are Muslims. You get. Now, does the Muslim community or religion allow those women to strip? How did they handle that? You know, religion versus culture. In the culture, they feel like they are stripping naked, more half naked, can impose something, can force maybe the British to do something for their husbands or to their fellow men counterparts. But again, to the religion, how did they really handle that? Thank you very much. I enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, Moses. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Doctor, for the wonderful presentation. Mine is brief. Why were the Buganda more interested in making these Nubians to be part of them? Because how can the real Buganda, the one whom I know, Sam, accept the so-called foreigner in your article that are now part of Buganda? And at the same time, why are these Nubians saying, no, we are not Buganda? From where? From Bombo. Secondly, how did the riot end? Did it have any connection with the 1945 and then 1949 riot? Because I'm seeing this decade full of riots and then strikes. Have ever come about any connection between the first 1940 riots in Buganda connecting to the 1945 and then the subsequent 1949 riots in the same region? Thank you.
Great. So you want to respond to?
They are very interesting, which I cannot actually answer all that. But for my academic siblings, I think I will give them, send them a copy of my dissertation. It answers actually most of these questions, especially about the origin of the Nubi, the hybridity, all those are catered for. Then the climax of the riots ended with the arrest and imprisonment of the Nubi at that particular moment. That's what I was looking at, you know, because they had represented their case, and they had kind of gave a message to the colonial authority that they were not ready to be part of this whole arrangement. But I'm yet to get a very analytical conclusion to the paper. Then the issue of is it religious for a Muslim to strip? In this situation, Islam prescribes that if you are faced with hunger, famine, don't ever say that because it is pork, I will not go in, with due respect. You know, if you die of hunger, then God is going to punish you for it, you know, because there was an option. So they are using it now as a final remedy to see whether it can help them, you know, get their men out, or even to show that they are very much angered and disappointed by the action of the British colonial police of arresting the men, or the men for that matter. Yeah, I think those are the pertinent questions I can react to, but I promise that this is a work in progress, and with today's contribution, I think that I will have another opportunity to present again when I've visited most of the sources and rephrased or reframed the paper. There was Joseph, I think. Joseph also asked something to do with Kasanvo, Luwalo. You know, there were many native taxes which were at play at that time, but then you could consider that Kasamvo and Luwalo were more coercive. But here I was more interested in Luwalo because this is what the Nubians reacted to. However, I can also relate to Kasamvo, and I also conclude that both were coercive taxes, you know, where actually African labor was needed, which was unpaid, and you had to do it. So it's a matter of bringing that out. Then she also talked of the specific number of women, because when we talk about women, it is more general. So far, the sources I've tried to consult do not give specifically how many women protested, apart from telling us that quite a good number of Nubian women also participated in this riot. But as Professor Holly has said, maybe I'll need to revisit these archives, migrated archives. Maybe for them they can. But on the number of the Nubi who were arrested, first there were 4, and then those who went to protest for the arrest of the 4 that were arrested, at least I know from the sources that I've tried to consult that there were 44. So beyond that, I'm yet to discover from other sources. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation and discussion. It's been, it's really exciting to see this project at this stage. And I want to just thank Dr. Mahajubu and Professor Hansen for really getting this really important discussion going, and we're looking forward to seeing what you'll be writing coming out of this work. So thank you again. Thank you to everyone who's been with us online and here. This has been really, I think, a fantastic and rich discussion.